Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb built their public image on faith and family, but Lisa Weiss just shattered everything with secrets no one was ready to hear. In one shocking moment, whispers became undeniable truth, leaving fans stunned and demanding answers. What did Lisa reveal that Doug and Joni fought to keep hidden? This is the moment everything falls apart, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Watch before it's taken down. For over 3 decades, Lisa Weiss was the quiet strength behind Doug Weiss's growing platform. While Doug traveled to speak about marriage and faithfulness, Lisa stayed home, raising their children, managing the house, and supporting his mission. To the world, they looked like the perfect Christian couple, united in ministry and purpose. But behind closed doors, Lisa felt more like a shadow than a partner. Doug was always busy, taking calls, writing books, and preparing for the next conference. Lisa would wait for him to come home, hoping for a warm conversation or even a simple look that said, "I see you." But often he came home tired, distracted, and emotionally absent, his mind still on the next event or meeting. Lisa would sit across from him at dinner, feeling alone while he scrolled through his phone or planned his next move. The hardest part wasn't just the loneliness, though that hurt deeply. It was watching the man she loved stand on stages, telling thousands how to love their wives and save their marriages, while she felt unseen in her own home. She would listen to Doug's words about cherishing your spouse, about fighting for your marriage, and she would wonder why those words didn't reach their own dining room table. For years, Lisa convinced herself to be patient. She told herself it was just a busy season, that one day they would reconnect, and Doug would see her again. She prayed, believing that God would heal what was breaking inside their marriage. She stayed quiet, protecting Doug's image and the ministry they had built together, hoping that her sacrifices would eventually matter. But as the years went by, the gap between them only grew. Lisa felt herself fading, losing the parts of her that once felt alive and bright. She was not just losing her husband, she was losing herself in the process. Every time she tried to speak up about her feelings, Doug would nod, promise to change, and then move on to the next task, leaving Lisa feeling unheard and invisible. It wasn't one big fight that broke her. It was the slow, daily erosion of being unseen and unheard. It was the countless dinners eaten in silence, the empty seat next to her at church, the lonely nights spent praying for a husband who was physically present but emotionally distant. Lisa's world became small, her dreams pushed aside to keep up the image of a strong ministry family. In 2024, something inside Lisa shifted. She realized she could no longer live in silence, holding up a story that wasn't true. She found the courage to share her story, not out of bitterness, but from a place of truth and freedom. She spoke calmly but powerfully, revealing how she had lived unseen for years, supporting a marriage alone while Doug preached about faithfulness. Lisa's voice became a lifeline for other women who felt alone in their marriages, reminding them that their worth is not defined by how quietly they can endure, but by the courage it takes to speak up. She showed that even when you've spent years in the background, it's never too late to reclaim your voice and step into the light of your own story. Lisa's silent struggle became a voice, and in telling her truth, she began to find herself again. To everyone watching from the outside, Doug Weiss and Lisa Weiss seemed like the perfect Christian couple. Doug was the respected marriage counselor, speaking on stages, writing books, and appearing on Christian TV to teach others about faithfulness and how to save their marriages. Lisa was the supportive wife in the background, raising their children, managing their home, and standing by his side as he built a platform preaching about loyalty and commitment. But behind the carefully curated image, Lisa was living a painful reality that didn't match the message Doug shared with the world. While Doug was telling other men to cherish their wives, to fight for their marriages, and to put their spouses first, Lisa was sitting alone at home, waiting for him to look her in the eyes and see her again. She was the woman cooking dinner for a man who barely noticed her, cleaning up after family meals eaten in silence, and lying awake at night praying for a connection that never came. Doug's life was full of ministry appointments, counseling sessions, and constant travel. Lisa kept telling herself that it was all for God, that the sacrifices were worth it, and that one day he would slow down and remember the dreams they once shared. But the busy seasons never ended. Doug's phone kept buzzing, his calendar stayed full, and the moments when Lisa hoped to have him back felt shorter and shorter. Lisa said her solo to him. The moments when Lisa hoped to have him back felt shorter and shorter. What made the pain worse for Lisa was watching Doug's public image grow while their private world crumbled. She would sit in church as Doug preached about pursuing your spouse and never giving up on your marriage, while she felt abandoned in the very marriage he claimed to protect. She would watch him smile on TV, encouraging couples to seek counseling and fight for each other, while he would come home too tired to even ask how her day was. Doug wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He wasn't yelling or storming out of the house. Instead, he was emotionally absent while physically present, offering Lisa small smiles and quick nods that felt empty. Lisa was living in a home where she felt invisible, sacrificing her own needs to protect the image of a man she loved, even when she felt like a ghost in her own life. The public betrayal didn't come with one loud moment. It came in the small moments that built up over years. The missed conversations, the ignored pleas for connection, the constant prioritization of Doug's ministry over their marriage. Every time Doug told the world how to love well, Lisa felt the sting of hypocrisy, knowing that the man on the stage wasn't living those words at home. And then everything changed when Doug and Lisa's marriage ended. Doug moved on quickly, marrying Joni Lamb, a well-known Christian TV host, just months after the divorce papers were signed. To the world, it was a shocking but celebrated union, with smiling photos, social media posts about God's timing, and Christian leaders congratulating them on their beautiful testimony. But for Lisa, the remarriage was a deep betrayal that cut through everything she had believed in. She had spent decades supporting Doug's mission, raising their children while he preached about commitment, only to see him move on so quickly with another woman, publicly celebrating a new love while Lisa was still trying to process the end of their life together. But it wasn't just that Doug remarried, it was how quickly it happened and how publicly it was celebrated. Friends who once prayed with Lisa and Doug now posted blessings for Doug and Joni, acting as if Lisa had never existed. The Christian community that had once admired Lisa's quiet strength now turned its focus to Doug's new chapter, ignoring the woman who had sacrificed so much to build the life Doug was now leaving behind. Rumors began to swirl about whether Doug and Joni had grown close before the divorce was finalized. Lisa couldn't prove it, but the timeline felt too fast, too clean to be as simple as they claimed. She spent nights replaying memories, questioning whether the man she had trusted for so long had been preparing for a new life, while she was praying for their marriage to heal. Doug and Joni's public narrative was framed as a God story, a testimony of new beginnings and divine timing. But for Lisa, it was a slap in the face, a reminder that everything she had sacrificed and believed in could be replaced in a moment, with a smile on camera and a caption about God's faithfulness. Lisa felt erased from her own story. She saw photos of Doug and Joni smiling together, while she was left to explain to her children why their father was suddenly in a new marriage, why the family they had known was gone, and why it seemed like no one cared about their pain. She tried to protect her children, to shield them from the hurt, but the betrayal was too public to ignore. What hurt Lisa the most was the hypocrisy of it all. Doug had spent years telling others to fight for their marriages, to stay loyal, and to honor their vows. Yet he had moved on so quickly, celebrating a new love while Lisa was left to pick up the emotional wreckage. The man who preached faithfulness hadn't fought for his own marriage, leaving Lisa to feel discarded and forgotten in a story she had helped build. In the quiet moments, Lisa realized that Doug's choices didn't define her worth. His public betrayal and the hypocrisy of his actions didn't erase the love and faithfulness she had given for so many years. The remarriage, as painful as it was, became a turning point for Lisa, pushing her to find her own voice and reclaim her story. While Doug and Joni continued to build their public image, Lisa began to rebuild herself privately, discovering that even in betrayal, there is space for healing and new beginnings. She learned that the betrayal that felt like it would break her became the foundation for her strength, showing her that her worth was never tied to the approval of a man or the validation of a public image. In the end, Doug's hypocrisy and public betrayal didn't define Lisa's future. Instead, it revealed her resilience, her faith, and her ability to rise, even when the world tried to silence her story. To the world, Doug Weiss and Lisa Weiss were the perfect Christian couple. Doug was the marriage counselor who knew all the right words, standing on stages and speaking on TV about loyalty, faithfulness, and fighting for your marriage. People looked up to him, taking notes as he shared steps for healing and building strong marriages. He was seen as the man with the answers, a leader who carried wisdom and authority. Next to him, Lisa was the quiet, smiling wife, standing in the background of photos and events, supporting Doug's mission while raising their children and managing their home. To people on the outside, they were the picture of what a godly marriage should look like: a team, a ministry couple, living out the faith they preached. But behind the carefully polished public image, Lisa was living a life filled with loneliness and quiet pain. While Doug was preaching to couples about intimacy and connection, Lisa was sitting at home, waiting for him to see her again. She was cooking meals they barely shared, folding laundry while Doug was on the phone with clients, and waiting for him to come home so they could share a moment of real conversation. But those moments rarely came. Doug's world was always full of travel, speaking engagements, and book deadlines. He was on mission for God, but Lisa felt like she was not part of that mission anymore. She would watch him on TV, telling husbands to cherish their wives, to pursue them, to make them feel loved and valued, while she sat alone, wondering why those words didn't seem to apply in their own home. At church, people would come up to Lisa and tell her how blessed she was to have a husband like Doug. They would compliment his teachings and praise his dedication, and Lisa would smile politely, nodding while fighting back tears. Because no one knew that behind the public image, she was slowly fading, becoming invisible in her own marriage. The hardest part for Lisa wasn't just the loneliness, although that was heavy enough to carry every day. It was the confusion of living with a man who could talk so passionately about love and faithfulness while not seeing the pain in his own home. Doug wasn't cruel. He wasn't yelling or hurting her physically. Instead, he was absent, locked into a world that had no room for the woman who had stood by him for decades. They shared a home, but Lisa felt alone. They would eat meals together, but Doug's mind was somewhere else, already planning his next trip or his next talk. Lisa would try to talk about how she felt, about the distance growing between them, but Doug would listen briefly and then move on to the next task, the next ministry meeting, the next counseling call. She kept telling herself that this was just a season, that one day Doug would slow down and remember the promises they made when they were young. She reminded herself of the dreams they once shared, staying up late, planning a future of ministry together, talking about raising their family and serving God as a team. But the dreams were replaced with silence and emotional distance. Lisa tried to keep the faith, believing that if she just held on, if she prayed enough, if she served enough, Doug would see her again. She planned date nights, left him notes, and tried to bring up conversations about their marriage, but Doug was always too busy, too tired, too distracted. He would agree to the dates, but check his phone during dinner. He would nod when she talked but would not engage, his mind already elsewhere. The pain grew deeper when Doug continued to speak about marriage on TV and in churches while ignoring the very issues that were tearing apart his own home. Lisa would watch him smile and encourage others to fight for their marriages, to never give up, to cherish each other. And she felt the sharp sting of betrayal, not from an affair, but from the hypocrisy of a man who could not live the message he preached. When the marriage finally ended, it wasn't a loud, explosive moment. It was the slow, quiet crumbling of years of being unseen and unheard, of Lisa reaching out for a connection that never came, and of Doug choosing his mission over their marriage again and again. And then came the public remarriage to Joni Lamb. It happened so quickly that Lisa felt like she couldn't catch her breath. Just months after the divorce papers were signed, Doug was standing next to another woman, smiling for cameras, and sharing their God story on social media. To the world, it was a beautiful testimony of new beginnings, but for Lisa, it felt like a betrayal of everything she had sacrificed to help Doug build his platform. Lisa watched as Doug and Joni posted joyful photos, receiving praise and congratulations from the same Christian circles that had once admired her quiet faithfulness. Friends who had prayed with her and Doug were now celebrating his new chapter, acting like Lisa had never existed. The Christian media shared their story as a blessing from God, ignoring the pain of the woman left behind. And everywhere Lisa looked, there were reminders of how quickly Doug had moved on. She would see posts on social media celebrating his new marriage while she was still trying to explain to their children why everything had changed so fast. Her children were old enough to see what was happening, old enough to read the headlines, and old enough to feel the confusion of watching their father start a new life while they were still grieving the family they once knew. For Lisa, it wasn't just the betrayal of losing Doug. It was the betrayal of the story they had built together, the dreams they had shared, and the promises they had made before God. It was the pain of watching a man who had told others to fight for their marriages, walk away from his own, and step into a new one without looking back. Lisa felt like she was living in a world that didn't see her pain, that had moved on without her, celebrating a narrative that made her feel like she never mattered. She questioned herself, wondering if she had failed, if she had done something wrong, or if she was simply unworthy of the love she had hoped for. In the quiet, Lisa began to find her strength again. She started to see that Doug's public image did not define her worth, and that the way he moved on did not erase the love and faithfulness she had given for so many years. She realized that while Doug was living in the spotlight, building a new image, she was rebuilding her life with quiet strength. The public image Doug and Joni presented was a polished story for the world, but Lisa's private pain was a reminder that behind every perfect-looking life, there can be silent suffering. She learned that her story mattered, that her faithfulness had value, and that even when others failed to see her, she could see herself and find her worth again. Lisa's journey through the pain showed her that it is possible to rise from betrayal, to find hope after heartbreak, and to discover that even in the silence, her voice still mattered. She was no longer the invisible wife in the background of someone else's story. She was a woman reclaiming her life, one quiet step at a time, choosing to live with integrity and courage, even when the world wasn't watching. After everything fell apart, Lisa Weiss found herself sitting alone in a quiet house, staring at the walls that once felt warm but now felt empty. The noise of Doug's public life, the praise from Christian circles, the photos of him smiling with Joni Lamb, all felt like loud echoes around her, reminding her of how quickly everything had changed. For so long, Lisa had been the woman in the background, supporting Doug while he stood in the spotlight, holding her family together while he preached to others about faithfulness and commitment. Now, with Doug gone and remarried, Lisa felt like she had been erased. The life she had helped build, the ministry she had supported, and the family she had cared for seemed to move on without her. People who once praised her as the strong wife behind the scenes were now praising Doug and Joni, acting as if Lisa had never existed. It was a pain that cut deep, not just because of the betrayal, but because of how public it all was. She was left to grieve alone while the world celebrated Doug's new beginning. At first, Lisa didn't know how to move forward. The weight of the betrayal and the loneliness made it hard to get out of bed. She would scroll through her phone and see posts celebrating Doug's new marriage, comments calling it a God story, while she was left with questions, pain, and the silence of a home that no longer felt like a home. She felt invisible, like her years of faithfulness and sacrifice didn't matter anymore. But in the middle of that silence, something began to shift inside Lisa. She realized that Doug's choices didn't define her worth. She began to see that while Doug and Joni were building their public image, she still had a life to live. A future that could be hers alone, shaped by her choices and her healing, not by the actions of others. She started to reclaim her voice, piece by piece, in small moments that brought her back to herself. Lisa began to take walks in the mornings, breathing in the fresh air and letting herself feel the pain rather than hiding from it. She started journaling, writing down the hurt, the confusion, and the anger she had held inside for so long. For years she had stayed silent, trying to protect Doug's image and their ministry, believing that being quiet was the right thing to do. But now she realized that her silence had cost her too much. She started to remember who she was before the pain, before the betrayal, before she became invisible in her own life. She was a woman with dreams, a mother who loved her children deeply, and a person worthy of being seen and valued. She began to pray, not just for the restoration of her marriage as she once had, but for strength to rebuild her own life, for healing in her heart, and for the courage to step into a future that was hers alone. It wasn't easy. There were days when the grief came in waves, washing over her and making it hard to breathe. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, and she would cry, asking God why everything had turned out this way. But with each passing day, Lisa found a new kind of strength. The strength that comes when you realize you have survived what you thought would break you. Lisa also found comfort in connecting with other women who had walked similar paths. She joined a support group where she could share her story without judgment, where other women understood the deep pain of betrayal and the struggle of finding yourself again after losing so much. For the first time in a long time, Lisa felt seen. She wasn't just Doug Weiss's ex-wife. She was Lisa, a woman with a story, with strength, and with a future worth fighting for. As she began to reclaim her voice, Lisa started to speak out about her experience. She wasn't driven by bitterness or revenge, but by the desire to help other women who were silently suffering, just as she had. She wanted them to know that they were not alone, that their pain was real, and that their worth was not determined by the actions of someone else. She shared her story with honesty and vulnerability, reminding others that it's okay to feel broken, but it's also possible to heal. Lisa learned to set boundaries, something she had struggled with during her marriage. She realized that protecting her peace and emotional health was not selfish, but necessary for her healing. She stopped feeling responsible for maintaining the image of someone else's life and began focusing on building her own life with intention and grace. She also found joy in small moments again, cooking a meal for herself without rushing, sitting outside to watch the sunrise, spending time with her children and being fully present with them, laughing without the weight of fear or sadness holding her back. These moments became the building blocks of her new life. Lisa discovered that she could find hope in the middle of heartbreak, that she could create a new narrative where she was not just a background character, but the main character in her own story. Lisa's journey to reclaim her voice and future was not about forgetting the past, but about choosing to learn from it. She accepted that what happened was part of her story, but it did not have to define her future. She could grieve what she lost while still moving forward, embracing the strength she had gained and the wisdom she had earned through her pain. She also forgave herself for staying silent for so long. For years, she believed that her silence was a form of faithfulness, that by protecting Doug's image, she was doing the right thing. But she now understood that faithfulness to herself was just as important, and speaking the truth was a way of honoring herself and the journey she had walked. Lisa's story became one of quiet courage, a reminder that even when life shatters your plans, it doesn't have to shatter you. She learned that reclaiming your voice is not loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's simply choosing to wake up each day and keep going, to speak your truth even when it's hard, and to believe that you are worthy of love, respect, and a life filled with hope. In reclaiming her voice and future, Lisa became a light for others who felt lost in their pain. Her journey showed that healing is possible, that your worth is not tied to someone else's choices, and that there is a future waiting for you, even when the past feels heavy. She reminded everyone watching that even in the quietest moments, your voice matters, and your future is still yours to write.